Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and before I get to the actual card portion of the video, lots of questions lately about the VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink and how it compares to VersaFine ONYX Black. Now I've mentioned it in other videos, I just didn't do like a specific little bit about it. As far as I'm aware, I can't speak for Tsukineko, who makes these inks. As far as I'm aware they're the same. Like the formula is the same, I think. To me, it seems the same. The only difference I can tell is the ink pads themselves are different. And I've been using the VersaFine Clair because I like the ink pad. I like that it's a little bit smaller, like a little narrower, so it just fits better. And it doesn't flip off like the VersaFine ONYX Black. However, if you have the VersaFine ONYX Black, you don't need to get the Clair, as far as I'm concerned. And if the lid of that bothers you, you can take it off. Like, it doesn't need to have that hinge on it. You could just kind of pull it off. I just never bothered. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on it. They perform pretty much exactly the same. I've had my VersaFine ONYX Black for eons, and I've never had to re-ink it. So we'll see how the Clair works, but my only complaint with those inks is that they are not compatible with alcohol markers, and they also do tend to smear if you're not careful, but they're so crisp. So I was going to use them in the beginning, but then I remembered I have my Delicata Golden Glitz ink. I'm still on this gold and black and white kick. I love it. And after my last video, everyone was going on about how everything would look nice stamped in gold too. So then I was like, ooh, I should do that for this. Because I was only going to stamp these daisies in black. But I'm like, let's do more. Why not? So I use my Delicata Golden Glitz, and this is Simon Says Stamp's Gerber Daisy background. That is fabulous. And like, look how it's stamped. Ugh. Love, 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 love. And the Delicata Golden Glitz, if you do not have it, I highly recommend, if you get this ink pad or any of the Delicata ink pads, because they're metallic pigment inks, get the refill with the ink pad. Those types of inks, you do need a refill. You will need to refill them way more often. It's just the nature of the ink. And that one I have refilled several times, especially when I go through spurts like this where I'm using it a lot. I didn't obviously have to refill it today because I just refilled it the other day. And I think I did it on video too. So, just random. I'll have everything listed and linked, like I always do with the supplies. But I did the Golden Glitz first, and this is usually how I use my rubber background stamps like this, is I just have the stamp, face up, I ink it up, put down my cardstock, and then I just use scratch paper to keep the ink from transferring, all over my hands, etc. I was being a little more careful today than I usually am because I'm stamping directly onto my card base, which is Simon Says Stamp's 120-pound white cardstock, which is one of my all-time favorite white cardstocks for pretty much everything, but especially card bases, because it's smooth and it's heavy and it's that sturdy, nice, it feels like a quality card. So I really like it for that. And since I'm stamping right onto the card base and it's white, I'm trying to be more careful about not getting a bunch of smears and a mess, because I'm just a messy crafter. I get ink all over me. I dump things. I actually didn't edit it out this time. Near the end, I knock a bunch of stuff over. That's just the way I am. But when I'm stamping on just a panel that I'm going to adhere, I don't even care usually. Like I've shown in videos, I don't use the scratch paper. I get ink smears everywhere, but I'm adhering it down and you're not going to see it. Whereas with this, it's on a white card base. I don't want, smears everywhere. So I'd start with Golden Glitz, and then here I'm using that VersaFine Clair, and just inking it up, putting my card right down on it, and then I'm just using like scrap paper, aka my grid paper pad, which I pulled out again because I need to make another habit of using this because I love it. And I don't throw out my grid paper. I reuse it over and over and over again. Like I'll pull off, a new sheet for a video, but I'll keep the old sheet, use it for things like this, like just reuse it and reuse it until it's so saturated with ink and paint and whatever, reuse, 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 reuse. Big, big. Anyway, so after I did all my stamping, wipe this clean, and when I'm rubbing my hands again, my hands just kind of help absorb some of the excess moisture when I clean my stamps, especially rubber stamps. It just helps, especially if I'm going between different colors of ink or whatever, so that the next time you ink it up, when you ink it up with the second layer of ink, you're not going to have any moisture on your stamp that's basically going to water down the ink. So that's just what I do. You can use a cloth, but I just usually rub my hands against it and it's good. So, of course, I had to splatter. because that's just what you got to do. So my black soot distress paint, which is my like go-to for black splatter. I have yet to find anything as good as this distress paint. It is a bit of a bear to work with. It is permanent, like I've mentioned in other videos. I managed to always get it all over myself, but I've so far, knock on wood, I haven't got it on my clothes. But I washed my brush this time. I took my own advice and I washed my brush quickly with soap and water after using the paint, because the paint is permanent when it dries. And then I'm using my, of course, again, Starry Colors palette for the gold, but this time I'm following, again, my own advice. And I sprayed the colors with water and I'm letting them sit for a minute. So while they're sitting, I'm going to quickly clean my acrylic block, because it does get just like stained with like, especially that black soot paint, but sometimes it's different inks, etc. And when I want to quickly clean my acrylic blocks, I just use my Simon Says Stamp Ultra Clean Dauber, because that removes everything. Rubbing alcohol works too, but the Dauber is just convenient. It's right there. I just rub it, wipe it off with my baby wipe, and it's good to go. So this will remove pretty much everything. It'll remove stays on, the distress paint it takes off. Like, yeah, I like to kind of clean my acrylic blocks every once in a while, because I use them not just for stamping, obviously. Like, I use them as like little mini palettes. So I like to clean them off every once in a while so that they don't start contaminating other colors, etc. So now that the water has sat in those colors for a little bit, it mixes up a lot easier. You don't have to work it so hard like I usually do, because I'm impatient. If you let it sit for a minute or two, the water starts soaking in and it just really softens them, and then you can mix them up and paint with them, or what I use them for most of the time is for splatter. So exact same thing. Put it on my acrylic block, and I'm just using one of my little Tonic brushes and just flicking the brush against the edge of the acrylic block and splattering all of these cards. So just doing them one after another and then setting each one aside so that it can completely dry. So after I've finished the last one, I'm going to set all those aside to dry, and I'm going to work on my sentiments. And for the sentiments, I'm using the Daisy Bouquet stamp set, which came out at the same time as this background, and they just work perfectly together, of course. So I trimmed down some black cardstock for this large sentiment, and then I am going to heat emboss the sentiment. So I'm just going to line up the cardstock, line up the sentiment, and then I'm going to gold heat emboss the sentiment onto the black cardstock. So another, just doing everything at once. This is my typical, multiple production mode. So anti-static powder, ink up the sentiment with Simon's clear embossing ink, press that down onto the cardstock, and then I'm going to coat this with Simon's gold embossing powder. Once that's coated, tap off the excess, and then I can melt this with my heat tool. And then I'll just keep repeating this process 3 more times so that I have one for each of these cards. So because I trimmed this down to slightly larger my sentiment, I'm just very carefully holding the corner while I heat this so I don't end up like melting my fingers. And since I have my stamp platform out, I'm going to do the insides of the cards as well. So I am going to use this little cluster of daisies image from the Daisy Bouquet set because it's perfect. So I'm just going to kind of line this up. And with this, I'm not as particular. Like if I was doing the outside of card or something specific, I would have used one of my like rulers or my creative corners, to line up, since I'm doing multiple cards, to get it lined up perfectly. But with this, I'm just eyeballing it. I'm not too concerned. I'm stamping it on the inside. The daisies don't have to line up perfectly, between each card. It's fine. I just wanted to stamp them, on the inside just to give each card that little extra something. And I'm stamping the daisies in all of the cards with that Delicata Golden Glitz ink. So inking up the daisies, stamping it, putting in the next card base, etc. until I have all 4 stamped. And then for the sentiment, this time I am lining up the card base against the edges because, you want the sentiment to be straight. The daisies, it doesn't matter. Like they can be in any orientation, it doesn't matter. But the sentiment you want straight. So this time I, lined up the card base against the edges, and then I've got the sentiment straight. So then I can quickly just stamp, put in the next card base, stamp, put in the next card base until I have all 4 cards stamped with that sentiment. So get that into place. And then once all of these are stamped, I'm going to adhere the heat embossed sentiments to the front of all these cards with the Big Mama foam tape from Simon Says Stamp. And in my last mega haul video, I was like going on and on about this foam tape and the fact that they have, if you haven't watched that video, they have changed this foam tape. It's not the way it used to be. It's the same thinness, like it's thinner than regular foam tape. I would say it's about like half as thick. And it's awesome. I love Simon's foam tape. The original foam tape, it was a trial. I've had a lot of comments about that. People saying like, yes, I hated the release paper. I didn't care. It didn't bother me, but I understand like a lot of people were really frustrated with it, but it's changed. It does come off. You can see I can get with my little stubby fingernails, I can get it peeled up, no problem. You don't need to fiddle with it anymore and like, you know, slowly try and pry it up and all that stuff. It works like amazing. So I already loved it. I love it even more now. And I've already used a bunch of it since I got the new roll. So put that, all those sentiments on with foam tape. And then as a final little embellishment, I of course in my head I was like, ooh, I could add like some gold crystals or some black or some sequins, like, you know, everything but the kitchen sink. But I decided to just add, these are some Studio Caudia sparkling crystals, so they're clear. On camera you can barely see them like on the actual card, but in real life they're just pretty. They just add that little extra something, especially when the light catches it, without, you know, overwhelming. You know, I've got the gold stamp background and the splatter and the heat embossing and all that. So this is where I end up dumping the entire tray. This is what happens all the time. And the magic of videos is I normally edit this out because, you know, you guys don't need to sit and watch me like clean up my messes. But yeah, this is what I do. Just someone had made a comment about like, you know, everything looks like it comes so easily, etc. No, that's the magic of video editing. You know, I can edit out me dumping things and spilling things and the swearing and just all the things that happen, the real life stuff. Some of it's just NSFW, that sort of thing. So anyway, got everything adhered. I decided to pair all these with some of Simon's metallic gold envelopes because they're gorgeous. Didn't stamp the envelopes or anything because they're beautiful. And I think everything just kind of works. These would make a really good like gift set. People were mentioning that in the last video and I was like, that's kind of what I was going for with this. I was like, ooh, you could totally do up like a set of these and give them as a gift. Like how fun would that be? So as always, links below the video. I'll have a link to the blog post. I'll have my supplies. Everything will be linked. You can check it out below if you're interested. I'll also have some videos on screen here that you guys can check out if you haven't seen them. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye!